Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, October 1st, 2018. That makes it 10/01/18 for you lottery players. I don't know if you're into the ones and the zeros or not, or if you're digitizing your lottery cards, then you're in luck. We always have that going for us. Very good. Happy Monday. Happy October. Happy October Day. I don't know why October 1st isn't October Day, the way May 1st is May Day. But that's where we are. We have left October off the map on this, and I'm very upset, and I demanded an FBI investigation. So that'll be starting shortly. Unhappy anniversary for the Las Vegas shooting, still sort of looming out there as a big giant mystery. Gee whiz, not really sure what motivated a guy to bust out a window and fire on a crowd of innocent people with semi-automatic weapons that had been rigged up to fire like machine guns. And still really haven't gotten the message across to people about how many weapons there are out there that can be rigged up to fire like machine guns. But I guess a lost teaching moment in that one. But so much has been lost about that one, that particular shooting. It's amazing how little impact that one seems to have had, given the size and scope of it all. But perhaps we can look in on that. But it's hard to look at it when we're distracted with so many other gigantic nuclear conflagrations or garbage fires, depending on how you want to describe it. There's lots going on. Much more happening again on the Kavanaugh front, although I guess it'll be somewhat quiet time. We're in a quiet period during which the FBI is supposedly investigating, but all the reporting so far is that the FBI isn't doing all that much, and that the key witnesses who you would have thought would be talking to the FBI by now have been having some difficulty in doing it, although I have seen it variously reported that there was trouble for these main witnesses getting in contact with the FBI. I think I saw, at least last night, although now I really want to see confirmation of it, that Christine Blasey Ford had, in fact, finally been interviewed, but it took some number of days, but that other people who expected to be interviewed or expected to be able to contact the FBI have been unable to do so. We'll talk a little bit about that. The female assistant, I can't get over the terminology, hired by the Republicans on the Judiciary Committee, has issued a report to them, which is kind of weird. We'll talk about that later, or at least it's threatened that I will talk more about that later, as Armando says he wants to discuss this a bit too. We'll have Greg Dworkin joining us to bring us up to date on all of this stuff and try and figure it out. Let's see, what does BMAS have to say about this? Well, I was wondering about it. Why is it was reported, and I didn't really see very many people discussing it. Why is it that the report was issued to the Republican senators on the committee only, as so it would seem anyway? I didn't read in depth in any of the coverage, and I guess everybody just thought that would make sense because they were the ones who hired her. But as I understood it, it was the committee who hired her. It'd be very interesting to know, to me anyway, as a process person, whether it's the committee paying her or is it the Republican staff account of the committee that's paying her, in which case I guess it would make somewhat more sense that the report would be issued to the Republicans. Of course, the Republicans have no particular interest in suppressing this report because it's a product they ordered and they got what they wanted out of it, and they're happy to publicize it, I think. Though, I don't know, maybe there's more to it that we don't know about, and I guess we should find out about that. I am not certain exactly what the situation was, but if she was hired by the committee, then that report belongs in the hands of all committee members in its entirety, and we're right off the bat, we have a mistake and a partisan one at that, issuing the report only to Republicans. I don't know if it'll make a great deal of difference if it's distributed more widely. It says what Republicans hired her to say, which is that she hasn't got enough evidence as a sex crimes prosecutor, or an expert in the prosecution of sex crimes anyway, she wouldn't be able to bring charges in her jurisdiction based on what she'd heard, which of course was obvious because, well, one, the perpetrator just sat there and lied about it, and two, hardly anybody else was allowed to speak up and bring any evidence. Three, she wasn't allowed to conduct the questioning she wanted to conduct in the manner she wanted to conduct it, and so no surprise, she was unable to come up with anything that would have been solid enough evidence to charge him in a court of law, at least in Maricopa County, Arizona, which, on the other hand, is neither here nor there. I mean, it may be there if you're listening in Maricopa County, Arizona. It's certainly not here, but you know what we mean by saying it's neither here nor there, or neither here nor there. Either or either of those pronunciations will do. It's not a court of law that you're trying him in. It's not what's going on. It's not a relevant question at this point. This is essentially a job interview. And, of course, the goal here is to avoid even the appearance of any impropriety. And, by golly, we have not yet been able to do that. All right, Greg Dworkin chimes in. Let's see. I think we have to turn down a number of inputs here just to make sure that we don't get too much echo. Hey, good morning, Greg. How you doing?
Hey, how are you?
How's your FBI investigation going?
Well, nobody's saying.
Well, okay. If the doorbell rings or if Abby barks, the FBI is here to talk to you. Please send them to the people who are looking for them.
The key here is that when you were talking about the prosecutor, what's her name? Rachel Miller?
Something like that.
That report that came out and that they got what they hired, they got what they contracted for.
Right.
That's also true with the FBI investigation.
That's true, too. Lots of controversy about how that one got kicked off and whether or not, well, it depends who you ask. People like, I guess, Chris Coons say, Jeff Flake is the big hero here. Everybody else saying, he may just be providing cover.
Well, let's walk through this because I think it's kind of important. I have my own opinions on it. It's not that I know for sure.
That's fine.
But
okay.
Since I haven't been on the show since Thursday morning, and Thursday following that was the actual hearing.
Yeah, that thing, right.
With Dr. Ford, and then followed by dry drunk Kavanaugh.
We think dry. I don't know.
Well,
he still likes beer. He's not dry. All right.
Well, but if he wasn't drinking at the time, but acts as if he were,
yes.
That's what a dry drunk is. And actually, it fits the definition exactly.
All right, then.
His behavior.
I have it wrong.
But be that as it may.
Yes.
So that happens, and everybody has their own opinion. And on Saturday, I posted a very nice piece by Matthew Dickinson, who does a presidential power blog for his academic work. Mm-hmm. And I think it is true that both sides essentially set up the hearing to get what they wanted out of it. And that's not to take a both sides-ism approach to it. The Democrats really wanted to hear Dr. Ford. They made that hearing happen so that they could. They heard her. They believed her.
Yes.
The Republicans wanted to hear from Kavanaugh. They heard him. They believed him. Yeah. Each side felt that they got enough out of their particular champion so that they could go ahead and vote the way they wanted. And in that sense, the hearing wasn't meant to be a fact-finding operation. We know this because the FBI investigation prior to the hearing, but after Dr. Ford had come forward, that the Democrats were asking for, Dr. Ford was asking for, and by the way, Debbie Ramirez, the Yale student who said he exposed himself to her, had asked for, and apparently Julie Swetnick, Avenatti's client, had asked for. So that wasn't done prior to the hearing. That also wasn't done prior to the Maricopa County prosecutor putting together what she thought was a reasonable timeline. It can't be because she's not an investigator. You have to have the investigation before you come to your conclusions. She came to the conclusions before she had the investigation. And that seemed to be where things were heading, and therefore everything was going to be done on party line vote. And then on Friday, which was an incredibly dramatic scene, akin to the McCain thumbs down piece, everybody was pretty much lined up to vote at 1:30 in committee on sending it to the floor. It was going to be an 11-10 vote with the Republicans 11 and the Democrats 10. And again, Grassley has the gavel, and the Democrats don't have the votes no matter what they do. They could walk out, which they did. They could walk back, which they did, but they still don't have the votes.
Okay.
So now it's 1:31. Grassley is a stickler for starting on time. And, he's sitting there by himself. Everybody else is back in the cloakroom. And he's got stone-faced, poker face on. And the Republicans are looking worried. And then they keep going back and forth. Most of them stay where they are. Graham doesn't go back, and Orrin Hatch doesn't go back. It's Flake. And the way that this started is as they're getting closer to the vote, they finally sit down, and Grassley has heard about this because people have told him what's going on in the back room. And by the way, the reason that the aforementioned senators didn't go back there is that they would have no way of persuading Flake. They're the hardliners, and Flake didn't want to hear from the hardliners. So anybody who had a chance to persuade him was back there. They all come back. They all sit down. Grassley says, I want to defer to my good colleague from Arizona and have him make the first statement. And Flake says that I've come to an agreement with the Democrats. And I am going to vote yes to get this out of committee with the understanding that there's going to be a proper FBI investigation and it'll take no more than a week.
Right. That's what he said.
That's what he said. And Dianne Feinstein and some of the Democrats were a little confused by that because Grassley immediately says, okay, let's go for the vote. And Feinstein said, what are we voting on? And Grassley says, we're voting on sending this to the floor. But let Senator Flake tell us what's going on here. And Flake says, I want to delay any vote on the floor until the FBI has a chance to look. Graham says, you can't do that. That's up to the majority leader, not you. We don't have the ability to decide what's on the floor and what's not on the floor.
Wow. Okay.
And Flake says, well, it's my vote.
Yeah.
So if you put it on the floor, you don't have my vote.
Right.
And part of the time that he was spending in the cloakroom was actually being on the phone with several different entities. He was on the phone with Rod Rosenstein to find out if the FBI could, in fact, do an investigation within a week. He was on the phone with Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski and Joe Manchin, making sure that they were going to back him in this move, which they did.
Okay.
And so that was not what the White House wanted. That was not what McConnell wanted. That was not what Grassley wanted or Graham, any of them. But they didn't have any choice because if Flake votes no on this nomination along with Collins and Murkowski, then it doesn't pass and he's not on the Supreme Court. So they had no choice. They had to go along with it. Now, up until then, that's good. It's good for a number of reasons. It delays everything by a week, giving everyone else a chance to step back and see if there's anything else out there that might come out. And it's also good from the point of governance in the sense that we all know, as Armando has articulately told us many, many times, the Supreme Court is partisan as hell. But you have to have a veneer on it for it to function and for this country to function. It has to look like they're trying their best, that they have to be above it, that they not that they necessarily just call balls and strikes. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is pretty partisan, and she said so. But you got to get the feeling that when it comes to deciding the law, they can put some of that aside. Kavanaugh's performance on Thursday distorted that tremendously because he basically said this is a Democrat plot. This is the Clintons getting revenge, and I'm going to remember this, and what comes around goes around, and you guys are screwed if I get up there because I am going to get you. Basically what he said.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, to me, that was disqualifying right there. I don't need the FBI investigation to figure out that. And I've got on the Pundit Roundup today 4 or 5 excellent lie articles.
Lie articles. Okay, yes.
Lie, you know, for example, how we know Kavanaugh is lying from Current Affairs, which is excellent. This one this morning from Arc Digital. Brett Kavanaugh's a liar and 44 other things, I believe. Some honest thoughts about this fascinating, harrowing national drama from Nicholas Grossman, who's a centrist. Washington Post, Boston Globe, New York Times all published their own variations of the many times that Kavanaugh had lied to the committee under oath. But nonetheless, that's where things stood, and the veneer of having the FBI do this and at least look at some of these things was a big help and turned the temperature down quite a bit. So it accomplished that, and that alone is worthwhile. That's why Coons was treating Flake as a hero. The problem then becomes, well, the White House is having Don McGahn, who managed Kavanaugh's nomination from the get-go, good friends, is telling the FBI, okay, you can only interview these people, and gave an extremely limited list, most of whom were designed to support Kavanaugh's version of events. Mm-hmm. And this morning, we have other news outlets, now that they have a week to do this, coming out and finding other people from Yale talking about how heavy Kavanaugh a drinker was. And as a matter of fact, this one from the Washington Post is Chad Ludington's statement on Kavanaugh's drinking in Senate testimony. Full text of the statement: he's a frequent drinker, a heavy drinker, I know, because especially our first 2 years of colleges, I often drank with him. On many occasions, I heard Brett slur his words, staggering from alcohol consumption. He got drunk. He was belligerent and aggressive. On one of the last occasions I purposely socialized with Brett, I witnessed him respond to a semi-hostile remark, not by diffusing the situation, but by throwing his beer in the man's face and starting a fight that ended with one of our mutual friends in jail. I don't believe that the heavy drinking or loudish behavior of an 18 or 21-year-old should condemn a person for the rest of his life. I'd be a hypocrite to think so. However, I've direct and repeated knowledge about his drinking and his disposition while drunk, and I do believe that his actions as a 53-year-old federal judge matter. If he lied about his past actions on national television, and more especially while speaking under oath in front of the United States Senate, I believe those lies should have consequences. It's truth that's at stake, and I believe the ability to speak the truth, even when it doesn't reflect well upon oneself, is a paramount quality we seek in our nation's most powerful judges. So that's a statement he is attempting to give to the FBI, and of course nobody knows whether the FBI is going to accept these statements. Yes. Mark Judge's girlfriend wanted to speak to the FBI. Deborah Ramirez apparently was interviewed by the FBI. It's not clear that the witness list that she gave the FBI is going to be interviewed by the FBI. And if one has the impression that McGahn is trying to limit this and get it all wrapped up by, an hour from now, then Flake and Coons' move to put the veneer on respectability and legitimacy, which would have been important, may just fall apart, even though it was a good move. So just because it was a good move doesn't mean it works, and just because it was done doesn't mean it's all a sham. It wasn't. It was a good faith attempt to try to make things look better.
Yes, well, that's true. And they genuinely wanted that.
I mean, the very fact that you're trying to make things look better in this hostile environment is not automatically bad.
Well, by comparison to the who cares what it looks like, we have the gavel, we can do whatever we want.
That's approach. What it was prior to what they did that. It was raw Lindsey Graham rage about how dare you interfere. We have the votes, F you, we won, and that's how we govern. And God damn it, when I get there and I'm Judiciary Committee chair, you guys better watch it. I mean, that's what it was. So diffuse that's a good thing.
I guess so. I'll take it. I do think that look, it'll be up to him. And I don't hold out a great deal of hope that Flake will differentiate between the sort of investigation that a lot of other people thought they were possibly going to get out of this thing and the one that, say, Republicans looking to repair the veneer might be interested in. And I'm not sure where he falls on all that, except that I don't have a great deal of, generally faith in Flake. But okay, well, he did buy a week for us to clamor about this for a couple more days, and there is that.
Right. So, again, just like nobody expected Flake to do this, nobody really knows how this is going to work out. Predict It has like a 65% chance that Kavanaugh will be confirmed anyway. That's, not unreasonable. And obviously and clearly, Collins, Murkowski, and Flake and Manchin are looking for a reason to vote yes. It's possible that the FBI and this week's worth of investigations by the media, including, Ronan Farrow, Jane Mara, have another piece out about this guy who read the statement that I gave you. But the fact of the matter is that it's going to have effects regardless on the election. So the moving parts, a lot of people don't think he's qualified. He's now a national joke. It's not just Saturday Night Live. Everybody has the "I like beer" line on their lips. His reputation is certainly damaged. Everybody understands that to push him through and get him on the Supreme Court is a power play. And most people understand that that would be damaging. Some people don't because they think power is everything. But that's where we stand right now. And we don't know where that swing group is going to wind up because it's a question of the institutionalists and their own constituencies. Press Herald in Maine, for example, came out and said he's not qualified. American Bar Association said slow down and do this investigation.
Right.
ACLU, which doesn't normally do this, said slow down. This is not right. I mean, there's a lot of opposition to Kavanaugh that could build over the week. So they could push it through because they have the votes, but they also could step back and try to figure out where the damage is. And when I say where the damage is, there's, I think, a very good report by Jonathan Martin and Alex Burns in the New York Times about the political strategy behind all of this, which is essentially the House is lost anyway. And so to push women to go vote isn't going to hurt us any more than it was already going to hurt us because we've already lost the suburbs.
Okay.
But we could still keep the Senate and make people like Manchin and Heitkamp and McCaskill push them up and Tester and people like that and make them do very, very difficult votes and therefore keep the Senate. So from McConnell's point of view, it's a win-win. He gets to play power politics, he gets the judge he wants, and he might even keep his job. And if you lose the House in the process, oh, well, too bad for that. Of course, the problem with that thinking is they may wind up losing the Senate over this because people are really, 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 really upset.
Yeah. Oh, well, they could be wrong.
They could be.
It does happen from time to time. I don't know. We'll see how things progress from here. I just... I don't know. I have a feeling we're going to end up having mostly a fight about the scope of the investigation over the course of the week rather than find out anything more about what happened.
If we find out, it may not be from the FBI. It, in fact, may be from the media because now they know where to look.
Well, all right, we have that, and we of course have Armando's opinion that the New York Times article that you just read is incredibly stupid and not worth a damn thing.
Yeah, actually, it's totally on the mark, and Armando's wrong about that.
Oh, okay. Well, just so long as we have that, okay. I would like to investigate for a week.
The funny thing is,
yes,
actually looking at the reasoning behind it. And realizing that they actually are giving up on the House. We know from the triage of money that that's happening in places, Mike Hoffman in Colorado.
Yeah.
Some of the other places where they're actually pulling their money, they are in big trouble in the House.
Yeah.
Well, that seems to be right.
We'll give him a chance at some future point to discuss why it's actually completely wrong. We'll find out. What he has to say.
Sometimes when Armando says that's pretty obvious where he's getting at. Yes. In this particular case, I have no clue. So I just sent you this lovely little cartoon this morning.
Okay.
I
see.
It's an election polling place.
Yes.
Vote here November 6th. Line starts here. And the line is all women. Yeah. And it runs around the block. And around the corner are two elephants talking to each other. And one of them says to the other, is there any way to suppress this vote?
Yeah. Well.
And that's the end result of what's happened this week.
I guess that's true. So I guess so far Armando's objection is that the same people will, of course, be voting in House races and cost them the House, as will be voting in the Senate races. It's not true everywhere, though, and only a third of the Senate.
The Senate and House maps were totally different this year.
Yeah.
Just because the key parts of the Senate. It's interesting. One of the things that's happened in Armando's Florida, Armando happens to own Florida. I don't know if you know this.
Oh.
Is that Bill Nelson's made a comeback, and he's actually doing fairly well. Harry Enton had an essay a couple of days ago about how the race may be getting away from Rick Scott. So I don't see how this controversy helps them in Florida. But in North Dakota, maybe it does. And in Missouri, maybe it does. McCaskill has a tough race there, although she may still pull that one out. The Democrats may wind up proving that their strategy – now, the strategy may be wrong. The article isn't wrong. The strategy may be wrong. And Republicans may rue the day that they get this. Charlie Sykes has a whole article in Weekly Standard this week about how sometimes when you make a Faustian bargain with the devil and you get what you want, you realize maybe that wasn't such a good idea.
That does happen. It's, generally speaking, bad bargaining partner, the devil.
Right. Chances are it's not going to work out the way you want.
Well, if you're talking about Republicans, I hope not.
Yeah. So it's good to recognize the devil, when you make a bargain, so at least you know what you're getting yourself into.
All right.
That should more or less take us mostly up to the break.
Yeah, pretty much.
Fascinating week, and the high drama of watching Flake and Coons pull themselves out and go talk was really something to watch. You don't see that very often.
Yeah, that and of course the scene in the elevator, which I think was actually aired live on C-SPAN, which is also pretty unusual because they don't usually move those cameras around like that.
Well, more on that and more on C-SPAN after the break.
All right, more on C-SPAN. You heard it here first. Okay. We have about, we have a couple seconds. We'll look forward to that on the other side of the break. And I don't know. We'll see what else we can engineer for these things. But this was most of the weekend, besides, I guess, the declaration from Donald Trump, who was relatively quiet for the weekend, that he had fallen in love with Kim Jong-un, which is, I guess, fantastic for the two of them. Good luck.
Yeah, he also renamed NAFTA.
Yes, that's right. He has changed the name from the North American Free Trade Agreement to the United States, Mexico, and Canada Free Trade Agreement, and it makes
That's
all
the
the
United
difference.
States Marine Corps tour.
Yes, well, that's basically what it ends up looking like now that he has renamed it, and Daniel Dale is taking a look at it. There's actually some substantive changes in there. Leave it to the Canadians to find those, and we'll leave that for after the break. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Greg Gorkin still with us. Armando still typing in the background, trying to get a fix on exactly what's going on. But, he'll speak for himself shortly enough.
Good. Is he going to be on?
I assume he has asked to be on to discuss the Judiciary Committee. I don't know whether we want to. If we can bring him on during the next segment, if we'd like to clear this up, or if there are other stories you want to hit.
Just give him time. I mean, I really want to get his input in terms of how he sees the big picture.
Oh yeah. Oh, he'll have time. No doubt about that. I am somehow exhausted and more or less brain dead today, so I'm happy to give the time over to him, and we'll definitely discuss it in the second hour at the very least.
Right.
All right. So
Armando, for those of you who don't know, is a long-standing court watcher.
Yes. And he'll have plenty to say about it. And we will, and of course, long-standing basher of the New York Times. And very often they do deserve it. And I'm not clear exactly where we're going with this one, but we'll get to it.
Right. Now, Axios, another one outlet who's worth bashing now and again, had a story over the weekend saying there's no plan B for Kavanaugh. It's all in because we have nothing else.
You mean a backup person, like a Plan B nominee, or
right? They
some
can't
other
get
way
it
to
done
get
in
Kavanaugh?
time for the election.
No.
And there's a couple of reasons for that. Their Plan B that everybody talks about, Amy Coney Barrett, is unacceptable to Murkowski and Collins.
Oh. Okay. Sure she is.
So, you have this other person, and she's a woman. She'd sail through. Nobody would accuse her of raping somebody else. Well, that's all true.
That is likely true. On the other hand, Collins. I can't imagine the person
unacceptable together.
Sure.
Not going to happen.
Yeah. Well, they'll have there'll be a Plan B if he were defeated. It won't. The timing
would be
won't
after
work
the
out
election, and the election would change everything. And what if they lose the Senate? That's their fear. Lindsey Graham flat out said that in one of his rants to the camera. This is your plan. You want to defeat this, and then we won't have time, and then you get the Senate, and then we can't do this, and we're not going to let that happen.
Oh.
It's basically what he said with a big scowl and a sneer and a yell and a rant. He's not wrong.
No, he's got it right. That's what I'd like to do that.
Like to do that,
I
too?
mean,
I think it would be like a supreme karma
assault.
if that happened.
Yeah.
And then they can try Merrick Garland. Maybe that would go through.
Maybe. The other, he gets blocked all the time. Doesn't matter what he's doing. Or when he was blocked for a long time in his appointment to the D.C. Circuit Court also. It's something about Merrick Garland they don't like. Maybe he's too reasonable. I don't know. Maybe they just don't like Democrats to nominate anybody. That's probably it.
Well, they have Roy Moore. They can run him.
Yeah, that's true. He's sort of a judge. The other, in addition to getting him through before the election, initially the hope was, I don't know why they said so, but initially the hope was to get him in place and seated for the beginning of the Supreme Court's new term. That
First
starts
Monday in October.
That's today, so no. It's not a big deal. I mean, but and the court can, the chief can certainly time things if they really think he's going to show up at some point soon, or they can wait for somebody else. Whatever backup they need, they can they can deal with it. It's not a huge loss for them, but it was part of their plan, and they didn't get it. So I thought I would note that for some reason. Mm-hmm. All right. Let's see. So there's more. Though they say there's no plan B, there are a couple other people. They just don't. Well,
just in timing. They just in timing. They don't think they can just go ahead and pull somebody out and then just go ahead and do this.
Although, why not?
The report from Axios says specifically this. I have from the pundit roundup from Jonathan Swan. For the White House, it's Brett Kavanaugh or bust. They have no plan B, and there's not even discussion of one. He's too big to fail. Nice line there.
Okay,
I remember that. But I did promise you a C-SPAN update. And again, this is the background for all of this. And it feeds into the whole discussion about what you do about this. And that is simply what it was like on C-SPAN when the hearings are going on, and all of a sudden, unexpectedly to them, women flooded the network with stories of sexual abuse.
Yeah, I bet they weren't counting on that.
Steve Scully has been at the network for decades. As he fielded call after call on Thursday, he could tell something different was happening. As Christine Blasey Ford told the country that Kavanaugh sexually assaulted her in 1982, and the clip of her saying that, by the way, has been played all weekend. Again, how the media covers this is important. Not everybody watched the hearing. Only 20 million people did.
Yeah.
Which is a lot.
Right.
But not everybody did. And so they get their news from the news, and therefore, how it's covered is important. So if you only covered Kavanaugh's denials, that's one thing. But her accusation is actually being played all over. As Christine Blasey Ford told the country that Kavanaugh sexually assaulted her in 1982, woman after woman started to call into C-SPAN to tell senior executive producer and host Steve Scully about the man who had sexually abused them, which is what happened in the elevator to Flake.
Yeah.
Why did Jeff Flake step back and do this? Two reasons. One is that he was confronted in the elevator by two women who basically told him, "You're not listening and seeing us." And the other is his good friend Chris Coons, who reached across the aisle so that they could go ahead and do this. But well over a dozen people called, he said. It was such an organic moment. It just happened. We didn't plan it. And some of the callers were Democrats, some were Republicans, some were young. Many of them, like Ford, were years removed from the incident. And he hadn't expected to be flooded with these calls, but he also wasn't entirely surprised. After almost 3 decades with C-SPAN, he's come to expect people to call in during moments of national crisis. He compared Thursday to covering Anita Hill's testimony in the September 11 attacks. These just become moments where everyone was watching, everybody had an opinion, and the raw emotion bubbled up. That's exactly what the Republicans are afraid of, by the way.
Yeah.
Whether or not anybody notices, the article says, C-SPAN fields calls from regular Americans every day, so much so that John Oliver and company once dubbed Scully the most patient man in America.
I think he may be right. He's got a judicial temperament.
Yes, unlike Kavanaugh.
Yeah.
Jokes or not, Scully said listening helps him truly feel the pulse of the nation in a way others might not be able to. And so they Huffington Post, where this article is, talked to him about what it was like inside C-SPAN on that Thursday. How did you find this moment comparing to the Anita Hill moment? He said, obviously there's similarities in terms of the hearing and the drama. The comparison is you have I was there moments. One of the things we do best as a network is, we don't have pundits. We don't have talking heads. We just hear from the American people, and that was 27 years ago. But I do remember when we took calls then and when we took calls after 9/11, the emotion just came pouring out. You had so many people, they just had to speak. People wanted to be heard. There's two women in the elevator with Flake. They just wanted to be heard. That's very difficult to process your way around. Well, I'm sorry, you should have told me yesterday when it counted. Today it doesn't. It's very difficult. And that's, in fact, the argument that the Republicans were using up until the time that Flake said, no, they have to be heard.
Yes. Well, that's true. That was exactly – that's what Lindsey Graham said to his elevator confronters, or whatever you might call them. But he was similarly approached, and he said, yeah, sorry to hear it, call the cops, and then jabbed the doors closed button and left.
Did any of the comments from the women stick with you? Brenda, who was the first one, 76 years old. There were a number of other callers. What struck me is most of the callers were in their 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's interesting.
And most of them were recounting what happened when they were young teenagers. There was one woman who was 23. She had been abused when she was 17 and 18, so that was relatively fresh in her mind. But the general theme of those who did call were older. They remember what happened. They explained exactly what happened. And that's what I took away from it. Look, I'm married. I got 3 daughters. I have 5 sisters. Sexual abuse is an issue in our country, and it has to be addressed. This is Scully talking. Whether you agree or disagree with everything that happened yesterday.
Yeah. Well, it was an amazing moment from that perspective. And it must have been I didn't hear the C-SPAN callers, but it must have been very interesting to doubters, I guess, although who knows what penetrates their minds. But it must have been interesting to a few doubters who were open to hearing this thing, to hear people calling in and saying, I have the same thing. Not only was I assaulted, but I didn't talk about it. I didn't tell anybody. I didn't accuse anybody, certainly, for decades. And, I don't have the leverage that Dr. Ford has here, but I want to tell people who are out there saying, how could you possibly not say anything, that it's very easy to understand because it's happened to millions of people, and I'm one of them. That must have been something, I'll tell you that. Particularly, I guess, if people called in on the Republican line and said that, because
both lines.
People that didn't believe it. Oh, that's probably a Democrat posing as a Republican.
Yeah, no, I mean, they got criticism, but again, this was one of those raw emotion days.
Yes.
And the emotion is there, and you know what? Emotion makes people vote.
Yes, apparently
so
it does.
we'll end this with this Pew Research Center out September 26. Voter enthusiasm at record high in nationalized midterm environment. Top voting issue, Supreme Court, healthcare, economy.
Supreme Court now at the top.
Now at the top. With less than 6 weeks to go, voter enthusiasm at its high level during any midterm in more than 2 decades. Oh. And a record share of registered voters, 72%, say the issue of which party controls Congress will be a factor in their vote.
Okay. That's what
far
midterms
more
are
saying
about.
their midterm vote will be against Trump, 37%, than for him, 23%. And I sent you a little graphic of the voter enthusiasm.
Enthusiasms.
There you go, especially among Democrats. In 2014, September 2014, support for Dem candidate enthusiasm was 36.
Okay.
This is percent of registered voters who say they are more enthusiastic than usual about voting. Democrats in September 2014 was 36, Republicans 52. Now, Republicans have moved from 52 to 59. Democrats have moved from 36 to 67.
Oh, that's more.
It's way higher than it's been in the last 12 years.
Okay, I'm looking for. Was this the chart? Is this the PDF chart here, or
it's a little red-blue chart.
All right, I'm looking. Oh, there we go. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought there was another thing here. That might have been the cartoon that initially came through.
Yeah, the other thing was the cartoon.
Okay,
I sent it. It's too big a file, so I redid it so you could see it easier. But this one is the voter enthusiasm rises.
I see it.
Democrats have a 10 percentage point lead over Republicans in the generic ballot. And 52% say if the election were today, they'd vote for the Democrat. 42% say they'd report the Republican. That's up from 5 percentage points last time they looked.
Yeah.
And, that's even before all this stuff happened.
Oh, yes, that's true. So the next round, if there is one, may reflect even greater differences.
Right. And there isn't a whole lot of polling on how the Kavanaugh stuff went down, but that which there is suggests that Kavanaugh's popularity was declining. And in one poll that was done the week before and the week after the hearings, his approval went down 5 points. Yeah. I mean, 41% now oppose him.
Well,
that's up 5 points.
Yeah, I'm a little baffled by the polling of the Supreme Court nominees thing. I'm not sure what to make of it exactly.
Well, they're asking questions like, who do you believe? And more people believe Ford than believe Kavanaugh. And do you want him on the Supreme Court? In some polls, it's anywhere between 40% or higher that don't. Mm-hmm. So you scratch your head and say, well, how can that be a winner in the election that's going to happen in less than 40 days? And the answer is, well, only in spots. Again, North Dakota.
Yeah.
And Missouri. That's what they're looking at, not, everywhere. If you're looking everywhere, that's the House, and it doesn't look good for the House.
That's an interesting point, too. Yeah, much more localized. Nationally, 40% plus say no to putting him on the court, but in some certain...
In West Virginia, he probably has support, but not necessarily
so it is claimed.
In Florida.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see how this goes. And I guess this being so close to the election, and I know they've polled on Supreme Court nominees before, and it's only in the context of the election does it make any particular sense to me to know that, unless, of course, the numbers are overwhelming, as is the case here. And mostly, usually the story is that there's no story.
Right. The other story, which is a story, which continues to be a story, although this obviously takes precedence, is the whole network of conservative organizations, Judicial Crisis and others who are putting tons of money into commercials on cable TV supporting Kavanaugh, some of which are really creepy, especially after the hearings.
Yes.
The ones that say he's being smeared. You have to vote him in anyway. I mean, again, running like a campaign. We talked about this, I think, on Thursday, but it's even creepier now. You have an FBI investigation, however limited, going on, and they're running commercials saying, well, you just have to ignore that and just go ahead and push him.
There's a lot of creepiness going on. A lot of things that didn't look creepy at the start that now look creepy in context, of course. Yep. But, that's their thing. They run – that's the judicial crisis network's MO is to approach Supreme Court nominations not only highly tactically like this, but also as campaign issues and to spend money on those things. Like polling the popularity of a Supreme Court nominee, not entirely clear how effective it is, but it's out there and it colors opinion, and that's important.
Right. Well, so let me finish by actually reading from that poll. This is the Reuters Ipsos poll. It's in the pundit roundup, almost the first item. Meanwhile, opposition is growing. The Reuters Ipsos poll, which was conducted after the allegations were publicized, also found 41% of adults opposed Kavanaugh for the Supreme Court. That was up 5 points from a similar poll conducted from September 18th to 24. Right. Oh, by the way, if you want background, there's a ton of stories about Kavanaugh's dorm room and how drunk everybody was and how they used to throw up all over the bathroom and all sorts of, details.
Awesome.
Really awesome. I don't think they have pictures, though.
Well, few people would. Yeah, it was back in the film days. Now, today, with digital cameras, I think future Supreme Court nominees will have their drunken days and drunken carousals, etc., much better documented and probably Instagrammed.
And finally, I'm going to leave with you. Maybe you can read it if you want to.
I'm going to read too. Bye.
Bye. One of the finest articles written in this whole mess this week by Rebecca Traister, which appeared in the New York Times. Fury is a political weapon, and women need to wield it. What the testimony of Christine Blasey Ford and Brett Kavanaugh showed us about who gets to be angry in public.
Yes.
It's well written, it's fascinating, it's important, and I think that's the one piece that I'm going to go away with that's going to be stuck in my head.
Okay. Yes. Well, we'll take a look. I've read an awful lot in the last couple of days that has really stuck with me, and some really interesting different approaches and different angles on all this stuff. I've been very impressed with what's been put forward in the last week or so.
Sadly so. All right, with that, I will leave you, but I'll be back on Wednesday, and by then, maybe this will all be wrapped up, and we'll know where this is going.
We'll have some idea. Anyway, they'll have a couple more days on the clock for the FBI, though, right? So we'll see.
I mean, they have till Friday, but they could wrap it up as soon as today.
I guess they could. Want to do. That's true. That's just the upper limit on how long it should take is Friday.
And then we get to hear what Collins, Murkowski, and Flake have to say about it.
Well, I'm sure she's deeply concerned.
And troubled.
Yes.
All right. Take care, and I'll talk to you on Wednesday.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Greg.
I won't have time to listen to Armando while he's on right now, but this is a podcast, so I get to listen later. I'm really anxious to see what his whole take is on all of this.
Okay, well, you'll
get a
chance.
Not because he thinks I'm wrong, just because I want his views on it.
I see. Okay, well, you're allowed to. He'll probably deliver on that. Now, we'll be talking chiefly, I think, about the nature of the investigation and the report to Senate Republicans, but perhaps we can at least clear up the particular objection to the New York Times, which probably will just be, well, they suck at politics, and I dislike their approach to everything.
And radio and podcast listeners, keep in mind, Armando and I have known each other and been friends for like 15 years, so don't get carried away by any of this. Just because he's wrong all the time doesn't really matter.
It's okay. We'll all
he's my brother, and I correct him.
Okay.
All righty, take care.
Very good.
Bye.
Thanks, Greg. Pick up with this again on Wednesday when we're halfway through the FBI investigation, or the investigative period. Anyway, let's see. Well, okay, the door is open, Armando, for any point at which you want to rejoin us, and if that's after the 10 o'clock hour, that too will be fine. And let's see, where should we go with this one? I do want to take a look at the Rebecca Traister piece here, and that might be a good start. Let me see get a quick sense of how long this is and see whether I feel like we can give it its due. I guess so, if we really put nose to the grindstone here and get through it without too much interruption. But that's so rare for me. But let's take a look. Fury is a political weapon, and women need to wield it. And it's been a political weapon, but for other people. That's what's so interesting about this here now. And the politics of who gets to be angry in public, right? It's, for many years it was the case that Democrats were coached not to be, or you can't show that kind of anger. Women, same thing. They could show. One of the great analyses of the hearings was somebody pointing out, and I forget exactly who it was, that women are permitted to be angry, but they have to manifest that anger as profound sadness, as opposed to the Kavanaughs in the world, and we'll see whether this works out for him, who get to lash out in actual recognizable anger. It's been the province of men for a long time, but not all men, to paraphrase things, not to trigger people with their anger of the usual use of the not all men. I do mean, though, that really by this I'm referring to President Obama and, in a larger sense, black men who are not allowed to be angry in public. So white men get to manifest their anger and show it and let it out, and it's a strength, it's passion and fire. Whereas for black men to do it, that's just angry black man triggering for militancy, and everyone rejects it, supposedly. That's what the newspapers say. Are they wrong about that? Probably. And anyway, let's keep the focus on the women for a second, because that's where this article is, for one thing. And when you have coherent thought available to you for the show, you ought to jump on it. And that's not even to comment on the question of whether or not this would be women's political moment and we shouldn't interrupt it with other ones. But that'll only get you into a mess, because No one wants to wait their turn on these things, nor should anyone have to, and we can multitask. But for the moment, I have only one task, reading this. What the testimony of Christine Blasey Ford and Brett Kavanaugh showed us about who gets to be angry in public, says Rebecca Traister. Inside the room in the morning, she spoke carefully, precisely, in a high voice. She made jokes about caffeine and asked deferentially, and deference to Congress is an important point about what happened over the last couple of days, asked deferentially about whether it would be okay to take a break. She acknowledged her terror, but remained calm and cited her scientific expertise in how the brain responds to trauma. Interesting. Now, I don't want to interrupt too much, but asking deferentially about whether it would be okay to take a break, the way she approached things, it's interesting because she really did approach things in a sort of a courtroom manner. Though as many times as we've said this isn't a courtroom, she's approached things knowing that people might come into it viewing it as if it were a courtroom. And I guess if she's been an experienced expert in sexual assault and probably appeared as an expert witness in some cases in court, she's probably just carrying that knowledge, expertise, and demeanor over into this situation, and I guess it worked. Her voice trembled in moments of intense recollection. It sounded as though she might be crying, though no tears appeared to fall. She described the past sexual assault and the more recent media assault on her in excruciating and vulnerable detail, but did not yell, did not betray a hint of the fury she had every reason to feel as she was forced to put her pain on display for the nation. That is how women have been told to behave when they are angry, to not let anyone know, and to joke, and to be sweet and rational and vulnerable. Outside the room where Christine Blasey Ford was testifying on Thursday morning, women were incandescent with rage and sorrow and horror. They were getting angry in a new way, in a public way, an unapologetic way, a way that is typically reserved for men. Some men anyway, and that would again serve men well when afternoon came. Brett Kavanaugh bellowed, he snarled, he pouted, and wept furiously at the injustice of having his ascendance to power interrupted by accusations of sexual assault. He challenged his questioners, turned their queries back on them. He was backed up by Lindsey Graham, who appeared to be having some sort of fit of rage over people having the audacity to listen to a woman speak about her life and consider that she might be telling an ugly truth about a powerful man. And as soon as he was finished, it certainly felt as if the white men's anger had been rhetorically effective, that we had reflexively understood it as righteous and correct. Fury was a tool to be marshaled by men like Judge Kavanaugh and Senator Graham in defense of their own claims to political, legal, public power. Fury was a weapon that had not been made available to the woman who had reason to question those claims. What happened inside the room was an exceptionally clear distillation of who has historically been allowed to be angry on their own behalf and who has not. And outside the room was a hint of how it might be changing. Most of the time, female anger is discouraged, repressed, ignored, swallowed, or transformed into something more palatable and less recognizable as fury, something like tears. When women are truly livid, they often weep. Maybe we cry when we're furious, in part because we feel a kind of grief at all the things we want to say or yell that we know we can't. Maybe we're just sad about the very same things that we're angry about. I wept as soon as Dr. Blasey began to speak. On social media, I saw hundreds of messages from women who reported the same experience of finding themselves awash in tears simply in response to this woman's voice, raised in polite dissent. The power of the moment, the anxiety that it would be futile, the grief that we even had to put her and ourselves through this spectacle was intense. But it's not just sorrow mingled with our wrath. Our impulse toward tears in moments of fury stems also from an instinct that things will go better for us tactically, especially if we are white. Our perceived feminine fragility more easily discernible and likely to elicit sympathy within a white patriarchy. If we emote through tears, which are associated with women's vulnerability rather than through rage. Crying affirms many of us as female, and if you're a woman, comporting yourself in traditionally female ways is rewarded, while lashing out is punished. Whatever the connection, there's been a lot of crying in politics, and very little of it has stemmed just from women's feeling sad. Barbara Lee, the liberal Democratic representative from Northern California, knows well how to titrate rage in a palatable way. As a black woman in the House, she has had to learn. When I spoke to her last year about anger and tears, she recalled to me how the nation's first black congresswoman, Shirley Chisholm, whose presidential campaign brought a young Ms. Lee into politics, used to cry behind closed doors when she was hurt, adding, "You know how pain leads to anger." The tears, Ms. Lee recalled, were a product of Ms. Chisholm's being very sensitive, very hurt, and very angry. And she was never the only one crying. In 1972, at the Democratic National Convention to which Ms. Chisholm brought her delegates, George McGovern persuaded many feminists to support him over Ms. Chisholm and others. But Mr. McGovern then double-crossed them, instructing his delegates not to support a plank that would legalize abortion and violating an explicit promise to the women by permitting an abortion opponent to speak from the floor. The journalist and later screenwriter Nora Ephron covered the messy convention for Esquire. At 4 o'clock in the morning, Ms. Ephron wrote, Gloria Steinem, in tears, was confronting McGovern campaign manager Gary Hart. "You promised us you would not take the low road, you bastards." Well, that's pretty blunt. The next day, Ms. Ephron trailed Ms. Steinem out of a hotel where Ms. Steinem had gone to confront Mr. McGovern directly, but hadn't succeeded. If you're a woman, all they can think about your relationship with a politician is that you're either sleeping with him or advising him about clothes. Ms. Steinem seethed and started to cry again. "It's just that they won't take us seriously," Ms. Steinem told Ms. Ephron through the tears, "and I'm just tired of being screwed and being screwed by my friends." Later, she said, "They won't take us seriously. We're just walking wombs." We'll continue with this after our short break. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We do have Armando connected with us, so let's get to him in just a second. I wanted to, let's find if we can find a decent point to break off from the article that we're in the middle of here. There's still quite a bit left to it, so it was an ambitious attempt to try to get something like this back, fit in on the record here. But let's read just a little bit more here and clear up the or finish up the 1972 story here. But Rebecca Tracer's article continues here. It's a righteous diatribe, months and years of fury spilling over. Speaking of Gloria Steinem's agony, essentially, and anger at McGovern's maneuvering in the 1972 convention. A righteous diatribe, months and years of fury spilling over, and she can't get it out without weeping. "We cry when we get angry," Ms. Steinem said to me 45 years later. "I don't think that's uncommon, do you?" She continued, "I was greatly helped by a woman who was an executive someplace who said she also cried when she got angry, but developed a technique, which meant that when she got angry and started to cry, she'd say to the person she was talking to, 'You may think I am sad because I'm crying. No, I am angry.' And then she just kept going, and I thought that was brilliant." Well, that's a good way of putting it. You just put it all out on the table. That's it. Tell somebody how you feel. Fine. Tears are permitted as an outlet for wrath, in part because they are fundamentally misunderstood. One of my sharpest memories from an early job in a male-dominated office where I once found myself weeping with inexpressible rage was my being grabbed by the scruff of my neck by an older woman, a chilly manager of whom I'd always been slightly terrified, who dragged me into a stairwell. "Never let them see you crying," she told me. "They don't know you're furious. They think you're sad, and they will be pleased because they got to you." Very interesting perspective there. And I'll just add one more paragraph here. Pat Schroeder makes an appearance here. Then a Democratic congresswoman from Colorado had worked with Gary Hart on his presidential runs. In 1987, when Mr. Hart was caught in an extramarital affair aboard a boat called Monkey Business and bowed out of the race, Ms. Schroeder, deeply frustrated, figured there was no reason she shouldn't explore the idea of running for president herself. It was not a well-thought-out decision, she said to me with a laugh 30 years later. There were already 7 other candidates in the race, and the last thing they needed was another one. Somebody called it Snow White and the Seven Dwarves because it was late in the campaign. She was behind on fundraising, and so she vowed that she wouldn't enter the race unless she raised $2 million. It was a losing battle. She discovered that some of her supporters who gave $1,000 to men would only give her $250. Do they think I get a discount? She wondered. When she made her speech announcing that she would not launch a formal campaign, she was so overcome by emotions, gratitude for the people who would support her, frustration with the system that made it so difficult to raise money and target voters rather than delegates, and anger at the sexism that she got choked up. You would have thought I had a nervous breakdown, recalled Ms. Schroeder now about how the press reacted to her. You'd have thought Kleenex was my corporate sponsor. It's a good one. I remember thinking, what are they going to put on my tombstone? She cried. Very well. She probably did wonder that at the time. I want to break things off here just a little bit. I think we certainly get the gist of all of what's been written up here. I don't want to shortchange it, but I want to make use of the availability of Armando here to talk about this and a number of other things, because this article has an awful lot to do with the way the hearings were perceived, and a lot of the way the hearings were perceived. They tried on the Republican side to manipulate that by hiring their female assistants so that they were not seen on camera, I guess, not recorded, personally bullying the witness here. And it was kind of a show from start to finish. I'm interested to read this morning, and this is what got you interested. And when we were talking about it on Twitter, the idea that she was issuing her report to the Republicans, and is it only the Republicans on the committee that she reported to? That seems sort of odd for someone, I thought, ostensibly hired by the committee itself.
The entire thing is. Hold on one second.
All right. Because if it's more than a second, we can continue reading with Rebecca Traister.
1 second, David. I'm sorry. I got to
Sure.
turn this thing off.
Okay.
Apparently, I had you still on. Hello?
Oh, I see. Yep, we're here.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. Apparently, I still had the broadcast on. I thought
okay.
I turned it off. Sorry about that. I was hearing an echo in my ear.
Got it.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, although
David?
the connection's not great. Go on.
All right. Well, let me go to a spot where it's better. Okay. Hold
Okay. Shout out the window.
Okay, this
So, yes.
The way I looked at it was.
And now I can't hear you at all. Okay.
That Mitchell. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead.
David?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yes, go on.
the entire exercise of bringing Mitchell on, let's talk about what its purpose was. She was a sex crimes prosecutor. Mind you, in Maricopa County of Ohio, so where they have,
Yes.
a very bad record. And by and large, I thought that the idea of a sex crimes prosecutor picked on one side was obviously intended to do what ended up at the end. She issued a memo. I wouldn't have prosecuted this. That was the whole purpose of this, right? More so,
So it seems.
Than even the idea of her shielding them from questioning Professor Ford. I think it was this finish with her saying, I wouldn't have prosecuted this.
Yeah, that may be.
Okay, so that was the idea. And the entire exercise is outrageous. Let's put it this way. Suppose Democrats had hired someone, sex crimes prosecutor, and had grilled Kavanaugh.
Yeah.
And then they issued a report saying, I absolutely would have indicted him, and I am confident I would have convicted him.
Yeah.
That would have been improper, too.
Yeah, although maybe they should have done that.
I mean, apparently.
Yeah.
Let's have dueling crime prosecutors coming to different conclusions. This was not that. That's not how investigations work, period. I mean,
in France, maybe.
we've seen them. We've seen what happens. You gather all the evidence. You look at it. You test it. But beyond that, what made this exercise by Mitchell more ridiculous than anything else to me, mind you, full disclosure, during her performance, I thought she was absolutely incompetent and terrible. Of course, the format was disastrous. 5-minute intervals is ridiculous. But beyond that, even in her 5 minutes, she was ridiculously bad. I think she's a bad lawyer generally. I mean, just as a matter of fact. But for a prosecutor to say, after you've seen Professor Ford's testimony, in which, whether you believe her or not, you knew she was a very compelling witness. I mean, a sex crime prosecutor would die to have that kind of witness as your star witness. Whether you believe her or not, you say, wow, she's really compelling. She's persuasive. Everyone, remember? Oh, well, Kavanaugh's dead after she testified. Everybody.
People did say that or think that.
From all spectrums. That shows how good a witness she was. And this one, well, even though I've seen how good she is under pressure, I still wouldn't have wanted to go forward. Come on. It's a joke. I mean, and the reality is the ridiculousness of this entire exercise, of course, is that the Republicans didn't have the patience to wait for the payoff, which would have been this memo. They pulled her in the middle of the Kavanaugh question.
Yeah, that was odd.
So, well, why should I care? You guys didn't have enough respect for her to finish in time to finish her questioning of Kavanaugh, who, by the way, she does not mention in her entire memo. Was he a good witness? Was he a bad witness? Do you think you could have impeached him? What exactly are you talking about? By and large, by the way, most targets of an investigation would not agree to questioning. They would invoke their Fifth Amendment privilege and not subject themselves to any questioning at all.
True.
But, of course, Miss Mitchell's questioning was intended to be favorable to Kavanaugh. She was not acting as a prosecutor. She did not look like a prosecutor. She was a hack. I just amazed because I thought she was an incredibly ineffective hack. Think about it. This memo, we're talking about it, but most people are like, they're just rolling their eyes.
Yeah.
No one's even, it landed like a thud because it was ridiculous. She was lousy at this. Absolutely lousy at this. And in my view, Kavanaugh's probably thinking, I'm in the Federalist Society and this is the best they could do for me. Wasn't there some good female Federalist Society lawyer they could have brought up there? And I think that's a fair question for Brett Kavanaugh. Why didn't they have a better lawyer?
Yeah, I don't know how they got this one. That's a good question. I don't know what the connection is.
Well, she was a sex crimes prosecutor. Yeah. I think that's probably what they thought.
But there's sex crimes everywhere. I'm surprised it didn't bring an Iowa.
That. A good lawyer's a good lawyer, and a bad lawyer's a bad lawyer. She's a bad lawyer. That's just a fact.
I just can't figure out. Typically, you would think something like this, Grassley would go to Iowa for somebody.
Yeah, there's probably. Listen, I don't know who their choices were, but this particular attorney is a bad one. And I'm not saying it now after her memo. I said it if you watched my Twitter while she was questioning. I was like, "What is this? This is the worst cross-examination I've ever seen in my life."
I didn't know what it was. I mean, I understand what you mean.
This is what I do for a living, which is to ask questions of people. I do primarily litigation, and it's what we do. And I honestly, any honest lawyer would have told you, "Wow, she stinks."
I didn't know what I was looking at, mostly because I didn't really understand what role she was playing here, and I knew where she came from, and then I was like, well, I know that, for instance, in a courtroom setting, when you have the alleged victim of a sexual assault, everybody is right, very properly. Everybody knows to be deferential, careful, gentle in the questioning, and you don't get confrontational, you don't get in their face, and but it's usually the defense lawyer that has to do that job. I mean, it's the prosecutor has a relatively good relationship typically speaking, in a sex crime prosecution with the victim, assuming they're genuinely prosecuting the offender or the alleged
or even
offender.
investigating.
Anyway. Yeah, it was a very weird thing right from the beginning when they said, well, we have a sex crimes prosecutor coming to do this questioning. It's like, well, but isn't she's going to want to grill Kavanaugh, I guess, if she's bringing her expertise to bear. I've never seen a situation where you bring a sex crime prosecutor in to do the job of, if your guess is that the Republicans want to destroy the witness here, why would they bring her?
Defense attorney.
I mean, I didn't understand why they brought her to do this, and then it seemed to be reflected in her work.
And it showed.
Yeah.
I mean, even now, after everything and after Kavanaugh's weird performance, everyone says Ford told the truth, and even the people who are defending Kavanaugh have been very look over there. Oh, now they're going into his drinking habits, and of course the drinking habits are relevant to the claim of sexual assault. Kavanaugh was bad. Yeah, it's not surprising. He's not used to being questioned, and I thought he did pretty poorly. But look, there are people who are invested in defending him. I haven't honestly. I'm not objective, but I can tell you that in terms of performance, I thought Ford was an incredibly compelling witness, and I thought Kavanaugh was a very bad witness. I mean, the Devil's Triangle thing, the Ralph thing, the keg club. I mean, he was telling stupid lies for stupid reasons.
Wow. Yeah, it was.
He could have just admitted, listen, I was just bragging because that's what we did when we were kids, or something like that. I don't know what he could have come up with, but what he did come up with was so bad that I don't even know what to tell you. At this point, I don't think anybody believes Kavanaugh. There are people that invested in pretending to believe him, but I don't think anyone honestly believes him anymore. I think everyone is pretty much convinced that it happened. But, there are people who said, well, that remember he was just a kid defense. It's almost the subliminal, unstated defense now. Yeah.
Well, it was somebody had tweeted. I'll see if I can dig it up and share with everybody that the idea that Kavanaugh was selling himself as most of the Federalist Society people do, not so much as the choir boy, but as a lawyer and as a judge, as an originalist, and then saying the guy can't even be true to the original intent of his yearbook entry.
Has he actually sold himself as an originalist? I mean,
I don't know.
One thing
That's a good question.
That I disagree with Greg that I'll bring up with, because he talked about Ginsburg being partisan. Ginsburg's not partisan. Yes. She's ideological.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Kavanaugh's a Republican hack.
Yeah.
He's not an originalist. He's not anything. He's whatever's good for Republicans.
Yes, and so my guess is that if anybody asks him such a question, because it's a reflexive question now, Republicans who don't really know very much about this stuff and find themselves either on the Judiciary Committee suddenly or asked by reporters, why do you support somebody like that? They reflexively say, well, he's an originalist in his interpretation of the Constitution and a strict constructionist, and that's what I like. He's in the Scalia mold. I don't know whether he is or isn't, but clearly if you want to get on the Supreme Court now in a Republican Senate, that's the sort of thing you say about yourself or allow people to say about you.
He's most like Rehnquist to me. I don't know if you recall. Rehnquist was basically a partisan Republican attorney who was put on the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, he was a good student, finished first in his class at Stanford. I think I've told you this before. Mm-hmm. But he didn't have any distinguished academic career, and he certainly didn't have a long history as a judge. He had no history as a judge when he was named to the Supreme Court. He was elevated from the Justice Department.
Yep.
Kavanaugh's like that to me.
I would guess that's probably a pretty good assessment of it.
I mean, he's not. He was elevated to the D.C. Circuit from the White House. He had no bona fides as he's going to be a good judge. There was nothing to base that on. He didn't have any record, and he didn't come from a law professorship or frankly from any distinguished practice. He was never in private practice. He was always on the government dole. Mm-hmm. Worked for Ken Starr. Then he worked for the White House. Yeah. He's a Republican hack attorney.
Yeah, pretty much. And
who got elevated to the circuit court.
Yeah.
That's what happened. That's who he is.
They park them there. And this has to do, I guess, a little bit with the Federalist Society, and that this is what they're interested in doing is dressing partisan activists, essentially operatives, in the trappings of judicial office, so and placing them in particular on the DC circuit, because that's where Supreme Court justices come from, and it's the fastest
Ruth Bader
way up there.
Ginsburg was an ACLU attorney, a very accomplished attorney, won important cases before the Supreme Court, and that's not partisan, that's ideological. She did not represent the Democratic Party. Brett Kavanaugh, his entire career was representing the Democratic Party, the Republican Party.
And a good distinction between partisanship and
ideology.
She's a liberal, no doubt, but
right. She's absolutely a liberal, and her positions align with what the Democratic Party espouses.
Yes,
but she did not arrive at them from partisanship. She arrived at them from ideology. Indeed, she had to convince the Democratic Party to adopt her ideology.
Yeah, that's true, and you could very easily see her being consistent with her ideology in disagreement with the Democratic Party platform line here and there, but it would never happen with Brett Kavanaugh, because there doesn't appear to be, as it happens, I'm sure he is considerably more conservative than most, and that generally overlaps with the Republican Party, but his chief interest is the advance of the Republican Party, and he said as much in his testimony, basically. And
his opening statement was outrageous.
Right.
A vast left-wing conspiracy is basically what he accused. This is all having happened.
Yeah, it's all very interesting that it's all happening at the time when the Federalist Society is actually generating a lot of interest and essentially, piece by piece being exposed for what it is. There's at this point, even the name itself is covered. There are no Federalists operating in the Federalist Society, or there's very few of them. We discussed this the other day when we were talking about Orrin Hatch's amicus brief, looking to do away with the dual sovereignty rule.
On double jeopardy.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And it's where are the Federalists on
there
this?
Is none of that. There is partisanship,
Yeah.
and you'll see now that they'll attack the California net neutrality rules under guess what? An argument of preemption. They may be right. It may be preempted.
Leave it to the states.
That's not a states' rights argument.
Right. Well, anyway, it's interesting to see that this happens at the same time, because I think we'll come to understand that, for instance, his prominent membership in the Federalist Society, really what it comes down to is the Federalist Society hands out sheets that says if you're a Republican senator and you don't know what to say about one of our nominees, say he's an originalist. And in the Scalia mold, is he? I don't know. Who cares?
From Alec.
Yeah, very similar. And, is he a Federalist? No, who cares? I don't know, as a matter of fact. Who cares? It doesn't matter. The point is he's a gimmitarian, and we'll get what we want out of him. And to the extent that there's a dispute among Republicans as to which thing they may want, maybe he'll listen to me because I put him where he is today by bringing him up through the so-called Federalist Society. Maybe he'll vote Federalist. I don't know. Not sure what but
he'll vote
for abortion,
Republican,
he'll do what you want.
He'll do.
Yeah.
That's what he will do, which, if I may circle back to Rachel Mitchell, she isn't a crime prosecutor there, or a sex crime prosecutor there. She is a Republican hack who isn't going to look at it from any perspective of a sex crime prosecutor, just as Kavanaugh won't look at it as a neutral judge. She'll look at it from the perspective of a Republican hack and write a memo that a Republican hack would want you to write. And that's what she delivered.
Maybe so.
She just isn't very good, and it turns out Kavanaugh's not very good either. Gorsuch, I didn't actually watch his hearings that closely, to be honest with you, so I can't tell you how well or badly he performed, but I remember John Roberts, who was the apex of Republican hack performances in the sense of it being incredibly good. He was a great nomination performer. Best I've ever seen, I'll give it to him. Absolutely. Kavanaugh was a D-lister in terms of fake Republican hacks pretending to be a jurist, in my view. Even before the sex allegations came up.
Yeah.
I thought his discussion of the issues was ridiculously bad. I just think he's a poor performer. I'm surprised they don't have somebody better than him, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I don't know why they think that they don't. Although maybe, I don't know, unless it was a compelling story to somebody that he managed to graduate from Yale, get a clerkship, and then really not use it at all, and park himself in the White House, and then put himself and his, I guess then the woman he was dating and later married, that between the two of them, they were responsible for putting stuff in front of George Bush to sign, just documents.
Wow.
And
exciting.
Yeah, so a huge use of their legal knowledge there. And,
no, that's what I'm saying. There's nothing in his record. No. I don't even know.
I guess you want a lawyer doing that, because why not?
It reminds me that Trump said he finished first in his class at Yale Law School, which, from what I understand, is completely not true. Right. I said it's like he finished first, like Trump was first at Wharton,
right.
which is also not true. It's just
right.
Make things up.
I just marvel at the idea.
This very accomplished Brett Kavanaugh is actually sort of made up.
Yeah, and you might say, well, you know, it used to be the assumption that you don't just fall onto the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, but that's gone now too. Just like, you know, the idea that the Supreme Court is somehow not political, that's fallen by the wayside.
No, of course it is.
And particularly that he's the guy that gives, look, sign this. And also, I'm beginning to wonder whether he just said, somebody type me up a thing that puts me on the D.C. Circuit, and I'll see if I can get the president to sign it. I'm a lawyer. What the hell? And it worked.
Well, he was part of the deal. I don't know if you recall, of the Gang of Eight. The Gang of 14 or whatever.
14, yes. No, I recall
during the
that.
nuclear option. He was one of the judges that was agreed to be approved.
Yeah, and
obviously,
you can see why
he was an ask for somebody.
You can see why he was being held up. And in his first go-round, they had it right. The Senate Judiciary Committee Democrats said, this guy isn't a judge. What are you talking about?
He's a hack.
You're putting, it's George W. Bush, and they knew right away. George W. Bush is putting one of his Brooks Brothers riot guys on the court. Because this is not what this was meant to be for. And they blocked him, and righteous indignation, or not righteous, what they thought was righteous indignation from the Republicans. How dare you? This is outrageous, unprecedented, filibustering judicial nominations. We're going to do the nuclear option.
Right.
And that's where that whole thing came from. And that, by the way, I think is what Brett Kavanaugh was talking about. People were puzzled, apparently, wondering, what did he mean when he started talking about, what goes around comes around, and et cetera, et cetera. And they weren't sure exactly what he meant. And what he meant was he was one of the tacticians that put together the packing of the lower judiciary by George W. Bush, when he was able to do it full of Republican loyalists, and then eventually including himself. And what was going around and coming around was he was blaming Republican or Democrats for the unprecedented blocking of so many judges.
Yeah.
George W. Bush had put hundreds of judges on the bench, and there were 7 that people were like, "Now these guys aren't judges. They're not," or at least in the cases of a few of them, they are judges, but they're terrible, and we object to them based on their judicial philosophy. But people like Kavanaugh and a few others, these guys are just people that you think, well, if I was ever to run into a Bush v. Gore again, wouldn't it be great if they were on the court because they were loyalist for me in the fight in Florida? Why don't I reward them? Plus, 1, they get a prestigious judgeship out of it, and 2, I'll never have a close scrape like Bush v. Gore again if the guys who are on my team are the court.
Yes.
So that was that.
It won't be close at all. By the way, I know we're close to a break, but
yeah.
I still laugh at it, the myriad lies he made. One of the most striking, of course, was he said he had no connections to Yale when he got in.
Yes, I heard. Yeah, go on.
You heard the story?
Yeah,
tell me. You probably mentioned it. His grandfather went to Yale. He was a legacy.
Wow, that's weird. Yeah, I wasn't too sure about whether or not. I was like, well, the guy's name is Kavanaugh. Does everybody check that out? But I guess it has checked out.
He hadn't checked it out.
Yeah, I guess not. So
my grandfather went to Yale. I never knew.
Yeah, I understand he's one thing to have gone to Yale. He is buried at Yale, which I don't think happens to everybody who goes to Yale. So I have some feeling that he maybe had some strings to pull. Though he was dead at the time, but they were able to point to his gravestone and say, "That guy, my grandfather." Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Armando is still with us. We went into the break, revealing I think it was the Intercept reporting that despite the claim that he had no connections at Yale and got in by busting something or other. I don't remember what terminology.
Busting his butt.
Basically, yeah. Busting his whatever. I'm surprised he didn't have some kind of crazy slang for it. But yeah, and then it turns out, no, his grandfather went to Yale, which is not necessarily the very strongest legacy connection you can have. They prefer if it's your dad. I wonder what happened to his dad. Where did his dad go? But
his dad spent too much time with his calendars instead of busting his butt, apparently.
Maybe. And his grandfather, who was a Kavanaugh, went to Yale, and then further it was reported he's buried at Yale, which I think is. He didn't die while he was at Yale. That's not how that happened. I imagine he was a big benefactor, and so that the Kavanaugh name would carry some weight there. Then they tried to put a spin on it by saying, well, no, it wasn't that he said he had no connections whatsoever at Yale. He said that he got into Yale Law by busting his butt. He didn't have connections at Yale Law, and maybe his grandfather didn't go to Yale Law, but rather Yale, the undergraduate school there. But as many people have speculated, there are connections that you can find behind the scenes between Yale and Yale Law School. They are both,
behind the scenes.
Yes,
that's right.
They are, for instance, both Yale, and you pointed that out. That's quite correct. And I imagine when at Yale Law School they are evaluating your undergraduate education and say, what was the quality of this applicant's undergraduate education? Probably high marks for Yale there at Yale. And I don't know what kind of percentage of Yale law students come from Yale undergraduate. I mean, it's
I imagine the competition is stiff among Yale University undergrads themselves, but I tell you what, I imagine that the Yale undergrads have a better chance than if they had gone to, say, the University of Maryland.
Yes, one would assume that was the case. And so I don't know what he was talking about having no connections, but
it makes no sense. He's a liar. There's nothing he didn't lie about, though, David.
That's really true.
The Renata Alumnus Society we were all admirers of Renata.
Yes, big admirers. That seems pretty dumb.
The Devil's Triangle, which I didn't know what it meant.
Me neither.
But I never heard of it as a drinking game. But it turns out it means something, and everybody knew what it meant except me and apparently Brett Kavanaugh. We were the two people that didn't know.
Yes, and then I understand big story, but small story accompanying that. Almost immediately afterwards, the Wikipedia entry for Devil's Triangle. 1, there is one. That's weird. And 2, it was edited by someone from a congressional internet address to say, yeah, it's a popular drinking game enjoyed by friends of Judge Brett Kavanaugh, which, by the way, gives away the game and makes me think that maybe it was even done tongue in cheek. But popular drinking game. It's so popular. I'll tell you this. I went to college around the same time, and in a place where we were pretty well familiar with what was a popular drinking game and what wasn't. And I didn't know a devil's anything. No triangles. No devils.
I knew quarters that he mentioned. He said it was like quarters. I said I remember quarters.
Yeah.
And I remember Zoom Schwartz or something like that. Or
yes,
whatever.
There was one like that. And I guess the idea. He was trying to explain it was like quarters with 3 players shooting all at once. And I guess you could make up such a thing. And certainly, I guess it would make for a funny name if you actually knew. I didn't what the devil's triangle's other definition was. You might think it was funny to name a drinking game that, but I don't know. I knew most of the variants of quarters too, and that wasn't in there.
I
it couldn't exist.
So that whole line of questioning with White House was like, I wonder what that's all about.
Right.
And I found out later. And also, but the Renata Alumnus Society thing, I got right away.
Yeah, that was pretty obvious.
He just flat out lied about that.
And he
tried
Renata,
to be a cool kid and pretend. I mean, he comes from this athlete's world that I'm somewhat familiar with in that sense. Mm-hmm. And then he went to one of those athletes fraternities, which I'm also familiar with in some sense. And I know what those. Anybody who went to college, you went to Lafayette, so I know you must know about that type of world. Yeah. We know where he came from. We know what he was doing.
Yeah.
You should just admit it.
Yeah. Well.
Say, when I was young and stupid, I've learned better.
He may have initially have been tempted to do that, and I would guess he was coached by this White House. This White House hates that as a tactic.
Yeah, never apologize.
So they may have pushed him to do things that way, and it's possible. By the way, I mean, I guess he never explained, like, okay, well, it was a drinking game. But you were 17. And we never did get back to this about you lied about
the drinking age again, about Maryland.
Yeah, so you're a liar about that. You weren't legal. Now you're so into a drinking game that you got to put it into your yearbook entry. Let's suppose it's really a drinking game. What were you doing?
Drinking's a pretty big part of your life. I like beer. I told you.
I know. My goodness, I heard you. What's the, but you're a lawyer, what's the German beer purity law called? What's the name of that? You might ask him that.
I forget, but I had to deal with it once.
Mm-hmm. It's Reinheitsgebot.
I had to deal with it once.
People who are lawyers and like beer know it.
Called.
Reinheitsgebot.
Oh, there you go. You know more than I do. But I do remember dealing with it like 20 years ago.
Yeah?
Very weirdly. It was something
asked them questions about that.
It was an origin issue and labeling issue, and I remember I had to look that up for some senior attorney at some point.
Well, they should have asked some questions about that. What's your favorite? Hops?
Well, the professor, did you see Byron York's slam of the Yale guy who was on the basketball team? And he basically said, Brett's a liar. He drank all the time. He got puke drunk. And he also didn't just stick to beer.
Well, why would you?
And they looked him up, and they did the old marble kitchen table stuff on this guy. And they said, but look, he wrote an academic book called "The Politics of Wine in Great Britain."
Oh yes, the wine historian. I was wondering
wine, but he's not a wine historian. He's the politics of wine in Great Britain is actually about the politics of wine in Great Britain, which would go to issues like tariffs. Protecting the industries,
right.
It's sort of like NAFTA. It's more like a NAFTA book, I would imagine, but who knows?
But were they trying to say, like, because he's a wine, were they mischaracterizing him as a wine historian because he'd be drunk?
He didn't write about wine. He would be, look at him. He's a wine expert. Look at him talking about alcoholics. Because, of course, having written a book about wine makes you an alcoholic.
Right, and nothing goes better with a, $700 vintage than drinking the whole thing and puking. That's exactly what wine experts are doing.
But
they're spitting all over the floor.
He didn't write about wine. He wrote about the politics of wine in Great Britain.
Right. I mean, that's pretty bad. But, of course, that's the sort of conclusion that, Byron York would
that's
jump
Byron
to.
York.
But that's pretty funny.
There's no hackier hack than Byron York.
These guys, by the way, wine experts, true, I guess the real cream of the crop wine experts, I guess you could think they're puking all over the place. They spit that wine out so they don't get drunk.
Right.
The whole point, exactly. They taste wine and then spit it out so that it doesn't color their perception of the ones they taste later because they're drunk. But that's not even what he was doing. So maybe he was drunk when he was writing about the politics of wine.
But he didn't have to actually have a glass of wine to write about the politics of wine in Great Britain.
No.
But that's okay.
That's right. If you write about steel tariffs, how did you manage to eat so much steel?
Pouring the molten steel yourself.
Or you're eating it and getting, all right. Well, that's pretty dumb, but that's Byron York. That's not a surprise.
Yeah, exactly. It was just crazy. But again, here we are. Mm-hmm. And this FBI investigation is obviously going to end up being a sham, and we're going to yell and scream. But I've told you from the beginning, I think he's going to be on the court. It may be 51-49, it may be 50-50 with Pence breaking the tie. But I think the Democrats have done all they can do to delegitimize Kavanaugh and delegitimize this process, which is all I think you can ask them of.
Yeah,
it seems to me. And I think they've done a pretty good job. Given the cards they have to play, this was going to look like it was going to be slammed through 51-49. Collins was getting a lot of heat, but she wasn't shaken.
Right.
Murkowski had escaped it. Flake certainly isn't even a possible no even now. I mean, people forget he's a paleo conservative. Kavanaugh's right there for him. So I have to say that the Democrats have done what they can do here. Now, kudos to Professor Ford, who was just so compelling that it made the Democrats' job a lot easier.
Yeah.
In terms of delegitimizing this process. And frankly, kudos, thank you to Brett Kavanaugh for being such a bore and awful and being so weak as a witness. So I think it's a confluence of events, but I think they played their hand as best they could. Oliver Willis is up there ripping, they're not doing everything they can. And you ask, well, what should they do? And you're a procedural expert, David. Tell me, is there something else Democrats can be doing here that will not hurt them in terms of the midterms? Because remember, at the end of the day, we still have midterms in 35 days.
Yeah, there's no telling what does and doesn't hurt in terms of midterms. There's nothing in the realm of ordinary procedure that presents itself. No. And by the way, I guess while we're on that point, I guess we could just remind everybody that if you're thinking about, if Democrats were to win back the Senate, they could impeach and remove Kavanaugh from office. Just keep in mind that it's a 67 vote threshold, 2/3. I mean,
he'll never happen.
There are Republicans who
won't be impeached from the D.C. circuit. That's not going to happen. What could happen is we could expand the number of judges on both courts, on all the courts.
That's true.
Everybody in America can be a judge on the Supreme Court. We're going to have 300 million.
It's like the New Hampshire state legislature.
Exactly.
Everybody.
That's what we can do. We can do it by constitutional hardball. And you and I have discussed this. What is it? How many justices are on the Supreme Court? Where's that in the Constitution? It's not in the Constitution.
No.
It's in legislation. So if we have the House and we have the Senate and we either blow up the filibuster or not in the Senate, rather, we could do it with 60 or 50 plus a vice president. Yeah. And we can put 100 judges on the Supreme Court.
And have them rotate. If you can't have
a
term
cases.
limit,
you're this kind of judge. You can do whatever you want. Actually, you can only have one Supreme Court. There would be a constitutional case. But at any rate, let's see who has it. I think it's a political question. Who gets to hear that case?
Yeah,
my 100 judges, my 100 judges that I put on there, good. Let them vote. They're going to vote to agree with me. And there you go. But I just think that's silly talk. And what you can do is delegitimize what's the become of the Supreme Court. And I think that's been set up as well as possibly could be done right now. I think people forget how you have the different constituencies you're playing to. I'm talking quick because I'm about to leave you.
That is all right.
David, but I'll leave you just with this last thought.
Sure.
The idea that Brett Kavanaugh is Supreme Court material in any way is a joke. I mean, even for Republicans, it should be a joke. It's very clear he's not first rate. He's not first rate.
Right.
He's not a first rate hack. much less a first-rate jurist. Again, I would have voted no on John Roberts, but he played the game beautifully.
Mm-hmm.
Brett Kavanaugh is terrible about playing the game. He has brought disrepute on the court, the D.C. Circuit, on himself, and on this process, and he would be even, him sitting on the court is a disgrace, but that's the disgrace we need rather than somebody. In some respects, I want him on a 50-50 vote because what we have to do is delegitimize the court so we can expand it. That's my final thought. I will hand you back your 15 minutes of your show. Thanks for letting me spout for 40 minutes.
Sure thing. It's a good day for that. Thanks, Armando.
Okay, man.
All right. Take care. We'll do it again sometime when I'm equally exhausted and disoriented. It's a tough weekend. Okay. Well, there's a couple of points that we should hit and a few other articles we ought to enter onto the record. I don't think I'll get back to Rebecca Traister's excellent piece. I recommend it to you. Glad I could get through at least some of it and throw that angle out there about women and women's anger and how they're forced to express themselves only in very narrowly defined and limited ways. Maybe that changes, maybe not. But I do think that they're pushing at the envelope a little bit and in a good way outside of the hearing room, and that's good news. Let's see. Other things that I wanted to hit on here were, let's see. There's a couple of other additional news stories out there, some other concepts that I think ought to be expressed. How are we going to do this one? All right, let's see. Let's go here first, just to fill in one of the blanks hinted at earlier. I have a piece from the Washington Post actually running in the Fix column, though this one from Avi Selk. The American Bar Association, it was mentioned earlier in the show, that the American Bar Association has had second thoughts. Everybody has had second thoughts, and some great roundups of the second thoughts, like, for instance, that people at Yale have had second thoughts, and like Kavanaugh's big selling points. The Bar Association, which Lindsey Graham said, it's the gold standard. They say he's well qualified. They've had second thoughts. Yale Law School being the big deal here. They've had second thoughts. They got people who wrote letters of support for him who have second thoughts. Now this, second thoughts, and it's historical. And it brings you back to his first nomination. The American Bar Association had concerns about Kavanaugh 12 years ago. Republicans dismissed those too. That's the headline on the piece. History repeated itself. At least it had a spell of deja vu when the American Bar Association released an extraordinary statement at a crucial moment that raised concerns about Judge Brett M. Kavanaugh's nomination to a powerful judicial position, just as it had done 12 years earlier. Late Thursday evening, the ABA called for an FBI investigation into sexual assault allegations against Kavanaugh before the Senate Judiciary Committee voted on his Supreme Court nomination. The warning was all the more remarkable because just hours earlier, Kavanaugh and his Republican defenders had cited the ABA's previously glowing endorsement of the nominee, the gold standard. As one leading Republican, that's actually Lindsey Graham, I don't know what a leading Republican he is, as one leading Republican put it. Flash back to the mid-2000s and another fight in the Senate over Kavanaugh's nomination to a federal court, the only one he has ever served on. Basically, every time Kavanaugh has ever been nominated to a federal court, the ABA has had misgivings, is one way of saying this. Democrats, for 3 years, had been blocking President George W. Bush's 2003 nomination of Kavanaugh to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. They argued he was biased, as shown by his work as a lawyer for Bush's presidential campaign, for an independent counsel's investigation into Bill Clinton, and for other conservative causes. Republicans kept pushing to make Kavanaugh a judge on the powerful appeals court year after year. In his defense, they cited multiple reviews by the ABA's Judicial Review Committee that found him, quote, well qualified. The big attorney association's highest possible endorsement, meaning Kavanaugh had outstanding legal abilities and outstanding judicial temperament. Well, he really didn't. But in May of 2006, as Republicans hoped to finally push Kavanaugh's nomination across the finish line, the ABA downgraded its endorsement. The group's judicial investigator had, recently interviewed dozens of lawyers, judges, and others who had worked with Kavanaugh, the ABA announced at the time, and some of them raised red flags about, quote, his professional experience and the question of his freedom from bias and open-mindedness. His freedom from bias and, I guess, affinity for open-mindedness is what they would have meant there. One interviewee remained concerned about the nominee's ability to be balanced and fair should he assume a federal judgeship, the ABA committee chairman wrote to senators in 2006. Another interviewee echoed essentially the same thoughts. He is immovable and very stubborn and frustrating to deal with on some issues. A particular judge had told the ABA that Kavanaugh had been sanctimonious during an oral argument in court. Several lawyers considered him inexperienced, and one said he dissembled in the courtroom. That means lied. But hey, they had a more polite word for it. And so it strikes you that, yeah, he wasn't particularly experienced at all. And even in 2006, it was pretty obvious that he was a political hack who was being dressed up with the trappings of judicial office, probably for grooming him for placement on the Supreme Court more than anything else. And that was really concerning. Well, I guess what's more concerning to me is, how does the ABA come to the preliminary or the previous conclusion that he's well qualified? And I unfortunately, I think the answer is you look at somebody's resume and that's it. He went to Yale? Wow. Yale Law School? Wow. He had a clerkship on the Supreme Court? Wow. Those are all big things. Presumably they know the law very well. And he had a couple of political positions, sure, and nothing else, and no real legal experience. But, you know, he's been in all the right circles is essentially all that there was to that. And that's scary because most judges just sail through, and most judges get that well-qualified imprimatur, and it turns out there's not very much to it, because the first time they talked to somebody, they said, oh, wait a second. All the things that were consistent with the initial impression of the senators reviewing his record are true. So, well, anyway, as it turns out, all the reviews, I should say, I'll say it correctly, the reviews weren't all bad. So they had some positive reviews there. In the end, though, the ABA committee weighed Kavanaugh's, quote, solid reputation for integrity, intellectual capacity, and writing and analytical ability, unquote, against, again, quote, concern over whether this nominee is so insulated that he will be unable to judge fairly in the future, unquote. In a split vote, it downgraded the rating of the nominee to simply qualified, meaning he met the ABA's standards to become a judge, but was not necessarily an outstanding candidate. The day after the ABA lowered its rating, the members of the Senate Judiciary Committee called Kavanaugh to return and sit before them and argued about how seriously the ABA's concerns should be taken. They cannot be dismissed, as some of my colleagues suggest, as merely intemperate rants by Democrats on the committee. Senator Charles E. Schumer argued. You may know him. Predictably, of course, some are already launching a campaign to denigrate the ABA. And some did accuse the ABA of bias. Other Republicans dismissed the warnings and noted the group still found Kavanaugh to be qualified overall. Based on your going through that experience, would you recommend that we continue to consult the ABA when it comes to judges? Senator Lindsey Graham asked Kavanaugh, who laughed and declined to answer. So already they find themselves at odds with the ABA, and they say, let's undermine the authority of the ABA. Since we're on a crusade to undermine the authority of the courts, might as well undermine the American Bar Association while we're at it. 2 days after the hearing, the Senate Judiciary Committee voted to recommend Kavanaugh's nomination along party lines. The full Senate did much the same later that month, and so Kavanaugh finally became a member of the bench. In his 12 years on the court, he apparently resolved the ABA's concerns about his temperament. Kavanaugh cited the Bar Association's new unanimous well-qualified rating for his nomination to the Supreme Court in his opening statement to the Senate Judiciary Committee on Thursday, an angry, tearful defense against sexual allegations in which he suggested revenge on behalf of the Clintons had inspired his accusers. More about that in a minute. Here's my understanding, Graham told other senators afterward, defending Kavanaugh as he had done more than a decade earlier. If you've lived a good life, people will recognize it, like the American Bar Association has. The gold standard. His integrity is absolutely unquestioned. Why do you think so? He is very circumspect in his personal conduct, harbors no biases or prejudices. Yes, he does. He's entirely ethical. No. Is a really decent person. Maybe he is now. He is warm, friendly, unassuming. He is the nicest person. The ABA. Now, the ABA doesn't say things like that. But that evening, as Republicans prepared to vote on the nomination and Democrats accused them of ignoring multiple women's claims against Kavanaugh, the ABA once again ran up a surprise red flag. Deciding to proceed without conducting an additional investigation would not only have a lasting impact on the Senate's reputation, but it will also negatively affect the great trust necessary for the American people to have in the Supreme Court. ABA President Robert Carlson wrote in a letter to key senators. His group's endorsement of Kavanaugh notwithstanding, Carlson urged the Senate to pause the confirmation and have the FBI investigate the claims against Kavanaugh before making a decision. 12 years earlier, the group's warnings about Kavanaugh had at least delayed his confirmation for the hours it took the senators to debate them. On Friday morning, Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley dispensed with the new ones in less than a minute. The ABA's president's opinion doesn't alter the fact that Judge Kavanaugh received a well-qualified rating from the ABA Standing Committee, and the Standing Committee did not join this letter, Grassley said, as Republicans prepared to vote. Not everyone dismissed the warning. The ABA said it made that request because of its, quote, respect for the rule of law and due process under law, Senator Amy Klobuchar told the committee, and then stopped mid-sentence as background chatter washed over the room. I'll just wait until the staff is done talking over there, Klobuchar said, rubbing her eyes. That's an odd way of ending the article, but it's true. I did see that part happen, part of the hearings that I actually got to see. All right, got to wind things up here. Let's see if we can't cram in at least one more article for you to read, even if I can't get through it all. It is Empty Wheel, taking a look at that question of Kavanaugh's tell. Revenge on behalf of the Clintons, plural. She takes a look at this one. There's a part of Brett Kavanaugh's bombastic statement Thursday that stuck with me because it reveals the foundational logic of his statement. Indeed, his entire candidacy for a lifetime appointment on the Supreme Court. After complaining about how the nomination has destroyed his family, he accuses a shady, largely fictional mirror image of the right-wing noise machine of seeking revenge. And I'll skip the quote here of what he says, but basically you know the deal. And then she goes on to say, Marcy does, the guy who insisted, as he did when he worked for Ken Starr, that I'm strongly opposed to giving the president any break in the questioning regarding the details of the Lewinsky relationship, that guy thinks the scrutiny of his own sexual past is just revenge on behalf of the Clintons, plural. Not just Hillary, for as he explicitly mentions, President Trump and the 2016 election, but also Bill Clinton, the man whom Kavanaugh demanded describe details of his use of sex toys and, well, let's say other things as well, under oath. And perhaps even, by the way, Chelsea, the young girl who had to watch her parents be humiliated before the entire nation. In spite of Kavanaugh's suggestion that this imagined campaign would have consequences for decades, his admission that it might be revenge means it must be revenge for something done to the Clintons, Hillary, and Bill. For a guy who is unashamed about using stolen emails, the notion that he considers this revenge for Hillary is troubling enough. If this is revenge, it is revenge for Hillary being wronged during the 2016 election. And a big part of that wrong was using stolen emails. And Kavanaugh is no more embarrassed about using stolen emails than the guy who appointed him. Kavanaugh suggests in the same breath that Hillary was wronged, but that denying him a seat on the Supreme Court, even for behavior that resembles that wrong, would be an outrage, even if his nomination was due entirely to the fact that she was wronged. Brett Kavanaugh is not going to quit, no matter if his entire nomination is illegitimate because Hillary was wronged. Perhaps more plausibly, Kavanaugh's use of the plural Clintons suggests he thinks this is revenge for his own actions 20 years ago. And you would know what that was about, of course, the Ken Starr investigation, and his own demand that a man and his family be publicly humiliated. But again, if this is revenge, it suggests that what happened to Clinton, the insistence that Bill Clinton confess under oath to Kavanaugh about what he did with Monica Lewinsky, let's say, was itself wrong. You should read the article for yourself, is what I'm saying here. And once again, Brett Kavanaugh, the guy whose career was launched by demanding to hear the sordid details of sex under oath, does not care. Kavanaugh does not care that he himself, quote, set a perjury trap for Clinton, remember when he was the target of this, laying the foundation for a crazed national political crisis and an unjust impeachment over a consensual affair. He may recognize this as revenge, and in so doing acknowledge that it is akin to the coordinated campaign he wrongly assumes is amassed against him, but he does not care that Democrats are, he imagines, adopting his own playbook. There is more. You should read her conclusion, and you should read the language that Marcy unabashedly uses in her own writing. It's much better in the original Empty Wheelian. I recommend it to you. And now, though, time to hand things over to Justice Putnam to close things out for the day and to keep you tuned to Netroots Radio all day. And I don't know why I would say closing it out for the day. Let's tell you what he'll be picking up on that we missed for the day. Let's see. Lindsey Graham, of course, now, by the way, wants to investigate the Senate Democrats on the Judiciary Committee instead of investigating Kavanaugh and his perjury. How odd.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Wow, top line matters here. A black lawmaker quits the Vermont legislature citing online racial abuse. I wonder if it's trolls. And the White House is fighting to prevent the deposition of Wilbur Ross over the census citizenship question. That's a good one. We'll want to get back to that and so much more. He'll take it from here. We'll be back tomorrow.